Today we're highlighting community issues including safety in regards to spring break, relationships, alcohol.
My name is Kim Frazier. I work for the K-State Volunteer Center of Manhattan here on campus, and I help coordinate alternative spring breaks for students. For spring breaks specifically, we've had trips that have gone to Chicago, to Dallas, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, New Orleans, really all over the United States. And we work specifically with service organizations in those locations. Like for instance, this spring break we're going to Chicago. We're going to be working with the Boys and Girls Club and the Greater Food Depository. In Phoenix, Arizona, we're going to be working with an organization called Save the Family Foundation. So we go all over the United States, but we work specifically with nonprofit organizations and social services.
For these spring breaks, do you ever need a passport? And if so, how far in advance would you suggest starting that process?
For K-State's Alternative Breaks program, you don't need to get a passport because we're not leaving the country, but I would suggest getting it several months in advance, especially if you're going over a spring break, because a lot of students go abroad over spring break, specifically to Mexico. So that's something to really keep in mind, that you need to do it in advance. And another, just a personal thing that I've had here in Manhattan is it takes a lot longer if you're getting your passport in Manhattan. I actually had to make an appointment to go in, so I actually went back home to the Wichita area and I was able to get it processed right away. So that's something to think about. If you're going to be getting your passport here in Manhattan, you'll have to do it even further in advance.
Okay.
It really depends on what kind of things you're going to be doing on your trip. For instance, like I said, we're working with nonprofit organizations, so we need to contact them several months in advance. I think it was around November that we really started getting these rolling. So that's something to keep in mind, is what kind of activities are you going to be doing. But I would say at least a month in advance if you're not going to be working with a specific organization. Meaning specifically for the alternative breaks, again, we started off because we're all about service. So we started with the type of organization that we wanted to work with, what students are interested in. A lot of students at K-State really like working with youth, so we try and find youth organizations to work with. And then from there is the recruitment of students. We usually have between 10 and 20 on a trip. And that's something we have to keep in mind for, we typically drive on the trips. We take K-State vehicles, 15 passenger vans, which are a lot of fun to drive. And also, we have to think about where we're going to stay. Especially if you have a larger group of students, we try and stay in hostels. If we're working with the service organizations, a lot of times they can refer us to maybe some local churches where we get free or reduced cost housing. So those are some things that we keep in mind. Planning for, thinking about how the group is going to eat meals. Do we want everybody to stay together the whole time? Depending on the size, the answer can be no. For instance, we had a group of 30 students who went to New Orleans last year. I wasn't on that trip, but the group leaders tried to keep everyone together at all times, all 30 students, going out to dinner, going out to different activities, which really is probably not the best idea, trying to herd around 30 students in 2 vans. So that's something to keep in mind, how many people are with you on your trip. Personally, what I do is I sit down and I think through the whole trip, when I leave, what am I going to need to take, what are possible situations I can encounter, is it going to rain when we're down there. I just think through all the possibilities before we leave on a trip.
Okay. How much money do you recommend bringing for spring break trips?
That really depends on what kind of activities that you're going to want to do down there. So keeping in mind the sort of activities you want to do when you go on your spring break. Other things to keep in mind, like for instance, this spring break we're going to Chicago. We're going to have money to park in the city. Just kind of thinking about some of those. CTA passes, to take the subway and buses around. So it depends on the location, where you're going, what kind of activities you want to do, how often you're going to eat out. So that's something to think about in your planning phase.
What should you think about for your mode of transportation? Like if you're flying versus driving, and what are the different aspects you should think about?
Well, cost is one of them, determining maybe which would be more expensive. Wherever you're going to, like for instance, if you're going into a city, and if you're flying there, how are you going to get from the airport to your hotel or wherever you're staying? Again, that most of it goes back to planning and thinking through the process and thinking through your trip, what you're going to be doing.
When planning a trip for a group, what did you think about to make sure that all students would be safe?
One of the things we really try and do is we push the buddy system, especially when we're going into a big city. Just make sure you're never alone when we're in a new environment. That's probably one of the easiest ways to stay safe.
And what are your top 5 tips to have a good and safe spring break?
Some tips will probably be to plan ahead, to know your surroundings, wherever you're going to be going. Make sure people back home, you have a contact back home, people know what you're going to be doing, maybe check in every so often so people know spring break is a good time to go out and have fun, but just be safe and be aware.